Hello and welcome to Tuesday Talks at Merryspring Nature Center for 2026. My name is John Fromer, the Program Director and your host. Today's Tuesday Talk is generously sponsored by Camden River House. Recordings are made possible by the Cascade Foundation. You can find today's talk and previous talks on our YouTube channel. Merryspring is open every day of the year from dawn to dusk free of charge. Find out more at merryspring.org. Today's program, Garden Detectives Identifying Beneficials and Supporting Them with Native Plants, was recorded on Tuesday, March 3rd and presented by Hillary Peterson, PhD, and Gary Fish, the Maine State Horticulturist.
And we will enjoy your presentation.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you everybody who's here and taking the time to be here today. Before I go to the next slide, if you do have a smartphone, you can take a picture of this and then click on that QR code. I have this posted on the main IPM site, the PDF. I have links, Gary has links, that way if you're excited about something on there, and if you don't get this QR code now, just let me know and I can send you the location of that link. So again, thank you so much. I'm excited to get to just share a lot about beneficial insects. It's sort of one of the missions in my role is to help people to understand what all of the beneficials look like, insects and spiders and other non-insect arthropods, because they can kind of often be lookalikes to the things that we know as pests. And without that understanding, you might see something and not know what it is and panic, and you actually don't know it's a helper. And so, a garden is something really amazing. It's a living ecosystem. It's full of interactions that we really don't often notice, either because we don't know to look for them, or we don't stop for a few minutes to see, or it might just be like something you can't really see well with the naked eye. And so the beginning of my section of the talk, I want to just cover really some good pictures here of some of our helpers in the garden, just to kind of help get you ready to feel excited about seeing some of these hidden predators in action. Just sort of a visual introduction. I want you to feel as excited about this as I am, and I'm confident I can get you there. So first up, we have the minute pirate bug, sometimes also known as flower bugs. This species here, Aureus insidious, is the insidious flower bug. I'll point out this beautiful drawing here. I recently worked with a UMaine student, Alyssa Marini, who's a fantastic artist, to make a new poster called Garden Guardians of Maine. We gave them out at the Ag Trade Show this year. We'll give them out at other tables that we have, with the same goal. We just want people to learn to recognize these sometimes very little guys. But these you can see in this kind of blurry because they're so small photo here. I'm going to turn on my laser pointer. That's feeding on a thrips. So little guys, really helpful, and I'll teach you a little bit about where to look for them. Careful observation of all these different predators can uncover hidden relationships you really might not know are there among plants, pests, and predators. This is one that really surprises a lot of folks. The long-legged fly, this dainty, metallic, pretty little fly, is a voracious predator of aphids. You can see right in this photo here. It's got a little teeny aphid in its mouth. Insects, spiders, and mites oftentimes act as natural regulators of pest populations happening right underneath our nose. We just might not notice it, and we might not recognize it. One thing that I remember from when I was in college in Entomology 101, I caught an insect and I was like, this is the coolest thing. It must be a new species. I've never seen it before. And I was a little embarrassed when it turned out to just be a ladybug larva. But just like you have caterpillars that eventually become butterflies, beetles are the same, holometabolous insects or complete metamorphosis. So this is the immature stage of a lady beetle, and they are both stages voracious predators of aphids. So you can see those here. And then lacewing larvae, I like to think of them as little alligators. All these different natural enemies They feed on herbivores and really can help to maintain a balance in the ecosystem. And something I love about lacewings is their larval stage is so vicious and predates, again, lots of aphid feeding. But then the adults are so beautiful and dainty. And if you've ever heard of ant lions, they're actually cousins to those. And the larval stage, basically, it's kind of like if you've ever seen Star Wars, they kind of make the sand trap that insects fall into, and they grab them out of there. And then the adult stage of those are called doodle bugs, and they're just these cute, dainty things. So I love that. I love that dichotomy. And then tachinid flies, this is one that is so important to be able to recognize if you have any issues with Japanese beetles, which I'm sure most of you here have been familiar with what they can do, Japanese beetles. So this is a fly species that actually lays its egg on the adult Japanese beetle. That egg hatches, penetrates into the body, and feeds on that beetle from the inside, completely killing it. And then this is a pupa. This is what that is sort of feeding inside looks like, and then that emerges. So if you're going through your garden, hand picking or your ornamental plants, hand picking off Japanese beetle, you can usually see it with a naked eye, or maybe you need a hand lens, but look for these white dots because you want to leave that one behind. It's already, that Japanese beetle is going to be dead pretty soon and will contribute to the population of these flies, again, being helpers. Watching these predator-prey interactions can really reveal patterns that are important to know for your little micro ecosystem in your garden. And keeping note of those things, which I'll be talking about in a little bit, can really help you to understand and have a more holistic approach towards timing and management, and just taking a step back, taking a deep breath and sort of observing what's going on. And so with this, I'll show the soldier beetle, absolutely beautiful beetle. This is also known as the goldenrod soldier beetle, voracious predators of aphids, but lots of other things. And what's cool about this species, actually a couple cool things, this is what the larvae look like down in the soil. So you've got a larval beetle that's feeding on things in the soil, and then a flying adult that then goes up and feeds on things in the garden. And on top of that, they're pollinators, which is really cool. And then on top of that, I should have mentioned, almost every single photo that I've used here, I took off of iNaturalist, and they were taken in Maine, which is so cool. So, and of course, they're also feeding some of the other voracious predators as well, so the spider here. Just absolute awesome species. One important thing to think about is if you want predators there, they do need to sort of be able to establish before pest populations peak so that there's lots of predators to feed on the pests. And Gary's section is going to talk about how you can really support these predators. But one thing, as I mentioned before, that you can do that really supports them is being able to recognize them and leave them behind. And this is one of my favorite examples of an extreme lookalike. This is a predatory stink bug. And so evolution-wise, stink bugs evolved to be plant feeding, but then predatory stink bugs sort of moved away from that towards feeding on herbivores, which I think is really cool. I have a fun story with predatory stink bugs. When I was doing my PhD down in Pennsylvania, I was working on the brown marmorated stink bug, and I had huge colonies of those stink bugs because I was doing a ton of research with their eggs. And I'd go to people's barns and farms, and I'd collect them into bags and put them into the cages. And every so often, I'd go in the morning to collect an egg, and all of my egg masses would be consumed. I'd be like, oh, no. So occasionally, I would even think this was a brown marmorated stink bug and toss it in with the others, and it had a field day. And what's really nice about this species is that the eggs are super distinctive. If you look over in the bottom left-hand corner here, they are very metallic and have these little crowns, usually laid in clusters like this. And when they hatch, they're these cute little red stink bugs. And then as they grow, they get some more coloration to them until they eventually become adults. I've had people think these are ticks before, so just being able to recognize this species can be helpful. You'll find them on the underside of leaves in the garden. These are the eggs to save. I'd say for the most part, any other egg mass you see, it's a good idea to use your thumbnail and scrape that off into a bucket of soapy water. And, again, as I mentioned before, careful observation of the garden can really uncover some hidden relationships that you might not have noticed before among plants, pests, and predators, and just help you to feel a little more connected with your ecosystem that you have. This is a braconid wasp. Whenever people ask me what my favorite insect is, I can't commit, but I say that my favorite group are the parasitoids. So this is a tomato or tobacco hornworm caterpillar, covered in all of these. They look like grains of rice, but these are pupa. And this is the wasp that just emerged. And so all of these pupa have the potential to have more wasps coming out if you leave this behind. Again, this is not going to make it much longer, so it's probably worth the hit and a few more leaves to get all of these garden helpers. Really great photos here of it emerging. And, if you have kids or you're just curious, it can be kind of a fun experiment to take these and put them in a jar and watch what emerges. There's some instructions online I can send you on how to do that. And then rove beetles are also fantastic predators. They live in the ground, they go around and they feed on lots of different ground-dwelling potential pests. And, just documenting any interactions you see can help you to understand and anticipate those ecosystem dynamics. This is an assassin bug. They, especially as young, they look like dainty little things, and you might mistake them maybe for a little grasshopper. But just like a praying mantis, they have these raptorial forelegs that they can grab with. And they are also just super voracious, generalist predators. They'll feed on lots of different things, and they love to hang out on flowers. And so, the more we watch and learn, really the more we can kind of take a step back and marvel at the complexity of the garden ecosystem and feel good about sort of these dynamics that you're being able to create. And so for the rest of today's presentation, we're just going to talk a little bit more about how to observe, how to document, and then of course, how to support having more of these natural enemies of garden pests. And so scouting, if you haven't heard of scouting before, this is a lovely scientific system that anybody can do. So scouting or monitoring plants, it's not just looking at the plants, it's doing so both carefully and systemically with the goal of spotting problems early. And so it's not just kind of randomly deciding to go out and take a look at things. Ideally, you'll have a system, maybe something you do once per week, where you try to go out and you try to do a pattern to kind of get a good glimpse of everything you have, kind of a subsample. And ideally, also having a tool with you, at least a hand lens. When to begin scouting in your garden, really start as soon as those plants begin to grow, or at least when pests become active, because early attention is really key to catching things as they're going on and to have good usable information for the future. It's really important to know what is normal for the different plants that you're growing, knowing the typical appearance and growth of those plants, knowing what abiotic stress can do to the plant versus pests, and learning to differentiate the common pests and the common natural enemies. So last year I gave a talk on all the common garden pests, and that's on the YouTube channel if you want to check that one out. And we have the PDF on the same site. But this year I really want to help you instead recognize those common natural enemies. And that way you get really comfortable with the plants you're growing, and you can recognize abnormalities pretty quickly. And then my favorite thing, I'm a total data nerd. I love Excel. Tracking patterns is so powerful. Different pests affect different plants in different ways. And so taking notes in whichever way you want to, that can be a notebook, that can be a note on your phone. You can get an app, you can use a real system, whatever you prefer to do. But observing trends over time and having it organized in a way that you can, in the future, if you see something, you're like, oh, that looks like what I saw on my tomato plant last year. You can go back and see what you saw, what you did, and what did and didn't work. And the concept I'm really going to kind of dive into now is actually how to scout for beneficials. So, of course, it's good to, and you should be scouting for the pests and the pest damage, but there's something really cool about scouting for beneficials. Feels like a little bit of a treasure hunt. And if you are especially doing anything that Gary's going to be talking about later, trying to support those beneficials, scouting for them in your plants and in the flowers around your plants is a really great way to know if the efforts are working that you're doing, if the plants are working that you're trying. I guess just to like give yourself a good pat on the back too. And so the next few slides, I'm going to break this kind of garden environment here from the stock photo down into some zones. So the soil, flowers, and foliage. And so when you're doing the scouting, spend a few minutes each, look carefully and note what you see. A little bit of a simple toolbox you can have, I have over here. So, a smartphone, if you have one, is a really great tool. They have pretty good cameras these days. A lot of times you can have those photos geotagged. If you're not sure what you have, you can post it on iNaturalist or Facebook page Maine Insects is great for helping you find things. But iNaturalist is kind of awesome because it also gives, data and photos, so I can use those photos in my talks. A timer, be it just a regular timer or a timer on your phone. A field guide has nothing to do with my name, but I'm pretty partial to the Peterson field guide. And then a hand lens. And so starting at the soil layer, I have a link here to the Xerces soil scouting worksheet that I thought was pretty fantastic that you could choose to print and bring with you. This is where you're going to be seeing things like rove beetles, soldier beetle larvae, ground beetles, and you're going to be able to find those under rocks, composts, and the edges of bed. And so this soil scouting worksheet uses pitfall traps. So, something like a jar buried in the soil where you can bury it and come back and see what's in there. It's just a lot of fun anyways. But taking notes again, year by year with what you're trying, what you're planting, and what you're seeing can help you to see if the practices you're doing are healthy for the predators and to see if those predators are catching some of the pests too. Then thinking about sort of the flower layer, many of these different insects, like especially the parasitoid wasps, and Gary will talk about more too, their larval stage are really the voracious predators, but then the adults don't have those same mouth parts anymore, and they instead feed on nectar to have sugar so they can fly around and lay eggs and mate. And so on the flower layer, again, Xerces has this awesome flower scouting worksheet, but this is where you'll see things like soldier beetles, tachinid flies, flower flies, lacewings, of course, all the bees and the pollinators too. And so that is sort of the different groups you'll see there. Again, this worksheet is a really great way to learn the scouting method if you decide you want to give it a try. And then leaves, of course. This is going to be more the leaves and stems of the garden plants. A big tip on scouting leaves, many insects, sort of because of the shade and protection, they will lay their eggs on the underside of the leaves. So kind of get comfortable going down and flipping those leaves over to look for things. Look along the stems near new growth. And this is where you can see things like minute pirate bugs, lacewing larvae, lady beetles, predatory stink bugs, assassin bugs, long-legged flies, and lots more. Again, that's sort of where they're spending the majority of their time hunting and laying their eggs, and again, being protected from the hot sun. Again, there's a great foliage scouting worksheet that Xerces puts out. And so, just sort of a final piece here, and then I'm going to hand it over to Gary. As I said before, scouting is a scientific system anyone can do. And, if you haven't before, it's honestly quite a bit of fun. One of the favorite activities I really ever did in grad school, we had this sort of week before grad school started where we were just kind of really learning some basics. And we had an assignment where we just had to go pick a plot somewhere, like in the woods, and put like a square around it. And we had to put a timer and sit there, I think it was for 2 hours, and keep a journal. And we wrote everything that happened in that plot for the 2 hours, and then took pictures, and then tried to figure out what the species were and what the relationships were. And that activity has always stuck with me. because it's so easy to kind of zoom through life and just not pause and look at those things and really enjoy them. And with your garden, it's beneficial to you, and it's beneficial to really understanding what's going on. And so just some final points and tips here. Record what you see. Keep a garden detective log. You could have a binder, you could have a folder in the notes on your smartphone. You could take pictures and videos and so, put those up on iNaturalist. But whatever you find, have some sort of calendar, what you saw, where you saw it, when you saw it, so that in the future you can see, am I still seeing this species? If I'm not, what did I change? Really dynamic way that you can sort of see what's going on. Some ideas of the things to record when you're collecting data, the date, the plant, maybe the cultivar, the insect, the abundance of that insect, behavior, notes on what the plants are looking like. And then, observing predator-prey interactions in your garden, writing down what you see, and look for patterns, as I said. And then year to year, going back through, this is a great time of year when you're starting to think about planning your garden, to go back through your notes from previous years, your photos, your observations, think about, what you saw, marking the first sightings, the peak abundance, plant outcomes, things like that. And finally, of course, supporting beneficials. So this is what Gary's going to be talking about, but broad overview, simple practices really do matter. They need nectar from flowers to feed on. They can sometimes really need some mulch for shelter. And avoiding unnecessary sprays, really taking a step back and deciding your own garden, your risk-benefit sort of analysis, deciding what you need to do for you. Observation first, and then supporting those natural populations. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Gary.
Thanks, Hillary. Get my part started here. Come on. Everybody see it okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Maine and Northeast native plants that provide beneficial insects with the resources they need. And that's one way to keep them active on your garden. And there's lots to go through, so I'll get going pretty fast. I'm talking about native plants. So these are ones that were here pre-colonial, and they can provide nectar and pollen. They can provide host material. They can provide a place to overwinter. There's lots of different things that these plants can provide as resources. And, basically you need to look at what are the interactions, the host and the prey, what's going to be there, what they need, what kind of shelter do they need, what kind of climates. Do they have a place to overwinter? Do they have a nesting site? Do they need pollen or nectar, which many of them do in their adult phase? Many of them are feeding mostly in their larval stage, but then in their adult stage, they're looking for other types of resources. And so, some of the benefits of using native plants, they enhance our native biodiversity. They recreate some habitats that may have been lost because we've been planting non-native plants for so long. They won't become invasive. Some can be colonizers, but they're not invasive, like a plant that is from another part of the world or another part of the United States. They adapt to local climates, and they can provide permanent habitat that can reseed and keep going. There are some disadvantages in terms of, today it's a little bit more expensive to buy native plants for the most part. Some of them are starting to come down as more people start to produce them. And some of them are a little bit harder to establish. We've been using non-native plants for a long time because they're easier to grow, and nurseries have been growing them for many years, partly for that reason. And I'm going to present a number of plants here. There's about 26 plants that I basically have used a template from Michigan State University that they did an experiment a number of years ago, back in 2005, looking at having one of the most important things is blooms that go out throughout the whole season, because a lot of these native beneficials and maybe even non-native beneficials need that kind of resource throughout the year. And to keep them around, you need to keep feeding them. And so you'll see as I go along for each plant a number of stars. 1 is good, 2 is better, 3 is best, and it will be for both natural enemies and bees. You can see how they basically are the spectrum of when they are blooming on this particular chart. And I'll talk a little bit about that for each plant as well. I'll try to get through most of them. So giving it a go and starting out, first one that's early blooming is wild strawberry. It's quite good for natural enemies, things like the wasp that would be laying eggs on caterpillars. It's also very good for sweat bees. You can see the agapostamon there. It's a metallic sweat bee. You can see the actual plant itself on the right-hand side. So in each of these slides, you'll see pictures of the individual plant on the right, and you'll see the kinds of beneficials that they might support on the left. And then in the middle, you'll see the stars as well as when they bloom, their bloom time. So for wild strawberry, it's mid to late May. And then you'll see what they need in terms of sunlight and moisture. So these are sun-loving plants that can be in an average to a wet soil. Next one here is Golden Alexander's. It has really beautiful tops that are yellow, looking a little bit like Queen Anne's lace, which isn't a native plant, but Golden Alexander's is. It is extremely great for lots of natural enemies. You'll see so many different insects on the flowers of these plants. Here you can see some robber flies, kind of like those long-legged flies that Hillary was showing earlier. You know, they're going to be feeding on all kinds of insects in their larval stage. And then in terms of bees, there's things like yellow-faced and digger bees. Here you see a digger bee. Most of our native bees in Maine are either nesting in the ground or in stems of plants. They're not like honeybees. They don't have a big hive or anything like that. So they're individuals that are queens raising a very small brood. And for Golden Alexander's, it blooms from late May to mid-June. It needs a lot of sun. And again, it's one that will tolerate average to wet soils. Next one is Canada anemone, very beautiful plant with white petals, and can really colonize quite well as well in sunny areas. It will provide great habitat for pirate bugs, which are similar to some of the other bugs that were shown earlier, where they're going to suck the guts out of the pests that you might have. They are really good as well for the sweat bees. They don't support quite as many bees because of the shape of the flower, and they bloom somewhat throughout June. Again, they need full sunlight, where this one can tolerate kind of average soils, not real dry, not real wet. And it can make a really good ground cover. It will spread, it will colonize fairly quickly. So that's one to think about in terms of if you want a ground cover in a sunny area. Penstemon is one that has an unusual flower that is really, something that is great for bees. It's also great for this chalcid wasp that you see there and pirate bugs, and will do well for other types of bees. It blooms May to mid-June. It needs full sun. It tolerates much drier soils, up to average soils. It gets fairly tall, 1 to 2 feet tall, and it remains green throughout the summer. It will occur in just open fields sometimes, so it can be found here and there with it, throughout Maine. Angelica is one there's also a invasive form of Angelica. Actually, the purple bloom on the left is probably the invasive version, but there is also a native version. The Atropurpura is a really interesting plant, It doesn't have the bright colored flowers. It is often loaded with especially things like the hornets and yellow jackets and things like that we may be scared of, but are actually really great predators for a lot of the pests that we have. They'll also support flies and bugs. They're good for, again, the sweat bees that you'll see there on that particular chicory plant. And they require full sun. They can tolerate wetter sites. They get very tall, up to 6 feet tall. They have these palmate leaves that are a lot like a lot of the other plants that are in the same category as this. It will often occur in stream banks and marshes, so it is one that if you live next to a stream or next to a lake, you might be able to use that. It blooms in early June, although it is a biennial, so it's only going to flower every other year and come back through seed after that. So this is one that can be toxic. You don't want to get the sap on your skin and be in the sun, but it's something that can be planted in an area that you're not going to be spending a lot of time going through. It's really great for a lot of natural enemies, the yellow jackets and flower flies especially. It's really great for a lot of different bees. And it does have a very large white inflorescence. It can get up to 6 feet tall. It is, very good for a lot of different animals as well as for the insects. And it, again, is another that's a biennial, so it's only going to flower every other year, but it will come back from seed and will colonize an area fairly well. So you want to put it in a place that is going to be out of your way. It, again, blooms in mid-June. It can tolerate even a little bit of shade, but it also loves sun, and it can tolerate pretty wet sites, but also up to moderately averagely dry. Coreopsis is one that I particularly love and have planted quite a bit. It's not a Maine native. It's more of a Virginia or West Virginia native, but it's sold commonly in Maine, and probably with climate change will eventually become a Maine native plant. It does require pretty much full sunlight. It can tolerate some shade, but it's really good in terms of being able to tolerate drought and dry sites. I've seen it just loaded with jumping spiders and plant bugs and lots of different things. It really attracts a lot of insects. It's also, I think, much better for pollinators than Michigan State rated it. I've seen it just loaded with bees and butterflies and many other pollinating insects. It does bloom from June to August, and I think it's a particularly beautiful plant. Shrubby cinquefoil, another one that is, kind of a ground cover more than anything else, although it can get to be pretty tall, 2 to 4 feet tall. It is beautiful in terms of its deep yellow color. It's great for things like pirate bugs and wasps and dance flies and spiders, and it will get a few bees on it, not as much because of the kind of flower that it is. It blooms a little bit later in July and September. It does need the full range of sunlight and can tolerate average to wet soils. It, will bloom quite long, from July to September. So it's one to think about having. It also probably does a little bit better in alkaline soils than it does in acidic soils. Hemp dogbane, this is another one that can be toxic to people and animals, but it's around us all the time. It's not something that I think you need to worry a lot about. Most of the animals know not to eat it because it doesn't taste good. It is just loaded with natural enemies. It really supports so many different types of insects that are natural enemies to a lot of the pests that we have. It also will support, I think, more pollinators than they found, especially see a lot of butterflies on it. And it does require, a lot of sunlight. will tolerate average soils. I see it at my own house in the sunnier areas that I have right next to the water at Flying Pond. They can get pretty tall, 2 to 4 feet tall, and it can spread. It can spread them quite aggressively. So you want to put it in a place where, maybe you're not going to have it taking over other parts of your garden. But with all of these, it's better if you have a nice drift of the plants. It's, just planting one here and there isn't going to be as effective as having a good drift of each one of the plants. So lance leaf figwort, this is one that has a really unusual bloom and that attracts different types of species. It is, really an interesting flower. It's difficult to see it. It's kind of green and then will turn to a maroon. It gets to be pretty tall, 6 feet tall in full sunlight. It'll tolerate fairly wet soils, and it's often in areas that are like along floodplains or riverbank thickets. It is, interesting in terms of its bloom. So it has, if you watch the insects that come to it, they have a interesting way of trying to interact with it. It does attract a lot of wasps and flower flies. It'll also attract ants, which can be very beneficial as well in terms of both helping to predate on some of our pests, but in some instances to actually protect some of our pests. So they can go both ways. It does support a lot of the smaller bees, and it blooms from late July through early August. It needs fairly full sunlight, and it can tolerate average soils. Swamp milkweed is one that I've grown a lot. It does very well. It will colonize quite well. Sometimes it kind of peters out after a while, and you'll need to either replant it or it will reseed itself in other places if you allow it to do that. It is usually loaded with all kinds of insects, especially wasps. I see a lot of digger wasps, as you'll see in the one on the upper left-hand side that was at my house, as well as was the monarch that's in the lower left. And it does support, so many of these pollinators and natural enemies. Of course, it's going to also be a host plant for the monarch butterfly, and it blooms from mid-July to August. It does need full sunlight. It will tolerate wet sites. It doesn't do quite as well in real dry sites. It does have these pale pink blossoms that really are quite beautiful. It'll get 3 to 4 feet tall. You may have to tolerate some aphids on them. They do get orange aphids on them that can be sometimes a little bit detrimental to them, but generally you can just squish them and that takes care of them. And it can tolerate pretty wet sites, and it's a really nice plant. Culver's root, another interesting kind of candle-like inflorescence. It is great for pirate bugs and flower flies and wasps, as you can see in the upper left. It is good for many different types of bees. It's probably better for bees than beneficials. It gets to be 3 to 5 feet tall. It is a really nice plant. And as I talk about some of these plants that are fairly tall, there is a way to make them a little bit shorter. If you do cut them back really early in their growth, they'll come back and flower at a lower height. So that's something to think about. They do support a lot of different bees. It's a bloomer from late July to early August. Again, it needs pretty full sunlight, and it tolerates average soils in terms of moisture. Cutleaf coneflower, looks a little bit like black-eyed Susan or brown-eyed Susan, although it has a green center. And it is one that will really support a lot of different natural enemies, but I often see the crab spiders on there. Those are really prolific on both brown-eyed Susans as well as this cutleaf coneflower. You can see the one in the upper left. It also will support just a ton of different pollinators. It's really, I think, a great plant to put into any garden, and it will flower from late July to mid-August, so it'll flower a long time. Often it will colonize and fill in. It can be a little bit like the milkweed in terms of doing well for a few years and then maybe petering out, but then it will usually it seed into another spot in the garden as long as you let it. It can get pretty tall, 3 to 5 feet tall. It will tolerate fairly wet areas. So this is one that needs sunlight, but can also tolerate the wetness. And it's fairly easy to grow from seed. It is one that sometimes the deer will eat, so that can be a problem. And it will attract a lot of birds, later on as it goes to seed, as long as you leave those tops on the plants. Meadow garlic is one that can become a nice ground cover. It has kind of a blue to purple flower. It only, gets maybe 1.5 feet tall. It occurs in wetter sites naturally, but it will grow in a wide range of moistures. Again, it's a crab spider supporter as well as pirate bugs. It'll bring in lots of different types of bees, and it will bloom throughout August. Meadowsweet is one that I particularly like to grow. It does fairly well in wetter to average sites with a lot of sunlight. It will pull in so many different insects. It's usually mobbed with insects, flower flies, wasps, pirate bugs, all of those, and probably a lot more bees than they found in their experiments. I see it pretty well mobbed with bees all the time, especially bumblebees, but also sweat bees. It'll bloom throughout August. It has fairly fragrant flowers, which often look a little bit pinkish, but can be also quite white. Again, if it's grown from seed or if it's open pollinated, it's going to have lots of different flower shapes and colors as opposed to those that are cultivated and grown as a cultivar. And it doesn't germinate really well other than, from cuttings or from, plugs or something like that. It's not that easy to grow from seed. It can be done, but not quite as easy as some other plants. Yellow giant hyssop is one that is, again, got the candle-shaped flower. I've got a cousin there that's in purple on the left that you can see it attracting one of the soldier beetles on there. It also attracts a lot of different butterflies, including the hair streak on the lower left. It is about 4 feet tall. It naturally occurs again in meadows or along fence rows. And it looks best when you have kind of a mass of it, not just a single plant. And it blooms throughout August. It needs a lot of sun, and it can tolerate fairly wet sites. Horse mint is a really interesting one. It's a monarda, so it has these interesting blossoms that can be anywhere from white to pink, and may have even some yellow or maroon spots on them. They will get to 1 to 2 feet tall. They branch out quite a bit from the growing season, and they can tolerate really dry sites. So this could be a sandy bank or something like that. They do need full sunlight. They attract a lot of mud dauber wasps and soldier beetles and predatory plant bugs. They also attract some of the bigger, like carpenter bees and smaller digger bees and bumblebees. And it blooms throughout August. New York ironweed it's a New England native. It's not necessarily native to Maine, but it's planted a lot and sold a lot in Maine. Probably will become a native species as climate change makes things warm up a bit. And it will do quite well in pretty much all of southern Maine. It will attract flower flies and those chalcid wasps that are parasitoids. It'll bring in a lot of sweat bees. It'll also bring in your moths that you see on the left there. It's a pretty interesting plant. has nice purple blooms. It gets very tall, 3 to 6 feet tall. It will occur naturally on kind of river bottoms, so it does tolerate wetter sites, and it needs full sunlight, and it blooms throughout August. And as we get closer to the end of the season, it's really important to have all those blooms there, because a lot of these beneficial insects, both the pollinators as well as the natural enemies, they need to have a lot of nutrition before they go into the winter, so the overwintering stage can make it through the winter. Woodland sunflower, this helianthus is a really nice one. It can be a real colonizer, so you have to watch out for where you put it. It can really take over, but I think that's a good thing in many situations. It'll bring in these flower flies you see in the upper left-hand side. It'll also bring in the wasps and the soldier beetles and the pirate bugs. Like most of the plants that are in this kind of Asteraceae family, they really, can bring in a lot of beneficial insects. It blooms again throughout August. It has it needs a pretty much full sunlight to partial shade, and it needs average soils. And of course, the seed heads are really attractive to birds later on, so that's another benefit from this particular plant. False Indian plantain, this is one that's a Mass native, but probably has snuck its way into Maine quite a bit. It has these off-white flower clusters that are, not super large. They grow very tall, up to 8 feet tall. They have very large succulent-looking leaves. It can tolerate really dry sites. So again, this is one that you can put into sandy soils. It'll bring in soldier beetles and wasps and pirate bugs, and it'll also bring in lots of the smaller sweat bees and digger bees and bumblebees. It blooms again throughout August. It has needs a lot of sunlight, and it needs a drier site. Common boneset is one that I particularly like to grow. It has very attractive white flat flower clusters. It does get 4 to 6 feet tall. They're usually, very prolific. Can end up with a very solid carpet of white on the plants, the tops. And it likes moister sites with lots of sunlight, but it really brings in just a ton of natural enemies and pollinators. As you can see, it gets 3 stars for both. You see the hair streak and the bees and the wasps and all of those that come in with this particular plant. It's a really good one to plant. It does bloom right into early September, and it would be one that I think would be a great choice for any garden. Blue lobelia, really pretty color, can be from blue to purple. The spikes can get to be 3 feet tall. They like wetter areas. They need fairly good sunlight, but they can tolerate more shade than a lot of these plants. Again, it gets 3 stars for both. It'll bring in just a ton of natural enemies as well as bees, and it as well will bloom right into early September. This is one that I like to grow as well, so I highly recommend it. And it's definitely a good plant. Another helianthus. This is thin leaves sunflower. It looks a lot like the other sunflowers. It has bright yellow, 4-inch wide flowers. It grows 4 to 6 feet tall. It can as well colonize and fill in fairly readily. It can tolerate a little bit of shade, but not much. It likes the kind of average sites, and it can, again, become a little bit weedy if you, don't site it in a place where it's not going to take over other areas. You can see a flower fly on it in the upper left, as well as a sweat bee in the lower left. I love my goldenrods, even though my wife-to-be thinks she's allergic to it. Not many people are allergic to it. It doesn't, put pollen out that you can breathe in. It's pollinated by insects, and it is usually mobbed with all kinds of insects, and it does provide the late season resources that are needed. Showy goldenrod is an upright type goldenrod. It doesn't fold over, and it does need fairly full sunlight, but it can tolerate a wide variety of soils, even fairly wet soils. It will bring in all of those natural enemies. Here you can see that garden spider that I had on it in my field in Wayne years ago, and also just tons of butterflies and just every type of pollinator possible, as well as lots of ants and lady beetles. It's just a great plant. It'll get as much as 5 feet tall, but generally not quite that tall. And it is naturally occurring in meadows and fields. New England aster is another one that I love to grow. It can get top heavy, so this is one that you might want to chop down early in the season to keep it from getting quite so tall. It gets fairly big blooms. They get heavy and fall over. It's 3 to 5 feet tall. It really will bring in a lot of natural enemies, and it's one of the really late bloomers. I've had it blooming actually all the way into late October, and seen it just covered with bees. Even on those cold days when it warms up, they get active and come right out after the New England aster. It does need fairly full sunlight and average soils. It's one that I love to grow, and it does very well. Smooth aster, again, the asters are really important to our pollinators, but also to our natural enemies. A lot of them need that late season boost of pollen and nectar, and that's what they're going to get from these flowers. This one has kind of paler violet flowers. It doesn't get quite as tall, only 2 to 4 feet tall. And it is, a very late season. A lot of the asters are, even some of the non-native asters are very late blooming, and I recommend not mowing them down, just let them grow. And this one needs a fair amount of sunlight and tolerates up to somewhat moist soils. So when you plant these plants, oftentimes you need to put them in a meadow situation, and oftentimes you need to add grasses as well to provide support for the wildflowers and help to fill in the gaps so you don't get quite as much weed pressure. And it helps to provide rooting that's of different depths, which help to hold the soil. So they can be erosion control as well. The native grasses that I would recommend, one is Canada wild rye. It's a great host plant. It's good for pollinators as well. It has high drought tolerance. It's deer resistant. It's even salt tolerant if you're on the coast. It does need a lot of sunlight and fairly dry soils, but it's a great grass, kind of pretty in its own way. Little blue stem is one that I've tried to grow and haven't had a lot of success with. I don't have a very sunny site, so that's part of the problem, but it will do well in sunny sites that are not too wet. Again, it's a host plant for a number of different insects, and it will give you a really kind of reddish, beautiful fall color. Here you can see the Indian skipper. That's a interesting moth that's in the bottom left, and then on the top is a wood nymph butterfly. So it is an important host plant for them. And then the last grass is switchgrass, Panicum virgatum. There's other non-native switchgrasses you don't want to grow. This one can tolerate more moisture, and it's also a host plant for the tawny edge skipper and the Delaware skipper that you can see on the left, a couple of different butterfly/moths. It's a pollinator powerhouse plant for lots of different reasons in terms of its production of mostly pollen, but also nectar. It's very drought tolerant and salt tolerant as well. And if you want to learn more about a lot of these native plants, my go-to site is the Native Plant Trust Garden Plant Finder. I highly recommend using that site. It can help you to figure out what plants will grow best in your particular situations with sun and soils and the right eco region. And then if you want to ID plants that you find out there, you can use the site like Go Botany that has a simple key as well as a more advanced key. Again, a native plant trust resource. If you want to know where to buy some of these native plants, you can learn more at the Native Plant Finder that Maine Audubon has available. And you can also go to the Wild Seed Project to learn where to buy them. You can go to their Learn tab on their website and find a guide to where to buy them. I'll show in a second. And of course, they can help you to learn how to grow these plants from seed. And if you go to their website, they'll have a drop down under the Learn section where to buy native plants. And then if you keep going, you can see the native plant sources. So if you download this presentation, there's links to all of these individual nurseries that you can buy native plants from. There's also some that are online resources that are, I think, respectable and very good places to buy some of these native plants. And so a lot of this information was put together originally by Bill Schneider and at Michigan State University, and I want to just acknowledge that. Some of the photos are from different folks as well. And then I would also recommend that, if you have questions or you want more information about beneficials, that you consider going to the gutpest.org website, which has a whole section on beneficials where you can learn a lot more. And with that, I think I've probably run out of time, and we can take some questions.
Gary, thank you. And Hillary, thank you. Excellent, excellent presentation. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat, and we can watch that for a minute or so. And after that, we will have the presentation up on our YouTube channel in a couple of days. And let's see. So we have a question comes in. What would you suggest to help control squash bugs or squash vine borers?
Great question. What do you think, Hillary? I don't think of anything right offhand.
You could give me the same answer when I asked earlier today.
So yeah, again, if you're scouting in your garden, the squash bugs, at least squash bug eggs are pretty big and easy to see. So if you turn over your leaves and scrape those off. But I'm just gonna go here on my gutpest.org real quick to vegetables and go down to squash bug. And this is where we have lots of different fact sheets. So let's see what we have here. Management, this is again, remove or knock off, kill the nymphs or adults. You can drop them into a pail of soapy water. If you don't know, we always say to drop it into soapy water because that breaks the surface tension, so the insects will fall under the water and drown. If you see those eggs, they look kind of like stink bug eggs. You can look up pictures of them. You can crush them. What else? I'm not going to recommend any particular insecticides here, but folks at Extension have fact sheets that can tell you about that. Yeah, so that's thank you, Gary. And so on this website, what we have at the bottom of every page are fact sheets that are based in research written by researchers. So it's not, if you Google like squash bug control, you might get the first 10 hits on Google might be just advertisements for different products and things like that. But these fact sheets are not biased towards one company, which is nice.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, if there are no other questions, we are exactly at 1 o'clock. And Gary, Hillary, thank you very, very much. Incredible amount of knowledge that you have. And we will hopefully plan to have you come back next year if you have time. And thank you again. And with that, we will conclude our talk for today, and we will see you all next week.
All right. Thanks for having
us. Everyone.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you for joining this Tuesday talk. For more information, please visit Merryspring at www.merryspring.org and also